When did you have to choose between your children? I was shopping at Walmart when a kid asked me, "Sorry, ma'am, can you pretend to be my mom at my parent-teacher meeting?" I stared at him and he continued, "It's just that my mom's an alcoholic and she never shows up. If she misses one more, they'll call CPS." My heart broke as he was almost crying. "Please, I'll do anything. If you have kids, you'll even take their tests for them." He pulled out a crumpled report card showing straight A's. "See, I get all A's. I'll do it well." I wiped his tears and asked him to tell me about himself. He sniffled before saying, "I'm Mikey. I know I sound crazy right now, but if mom gets taken away, they'll separate me and my little sister. She's only 7. I can't let her be alone." I pulled him into a hug and gave him my number. That night, I stared at my son Merrick's progress report. 3 F's, 2 D's. His dad had already threatened to pull him from the team if grades didn't improve. So I texted Mikey at 2 a.m. "Deal. But strictly business. You take his tests, I play your mom." We met at a Dunkin' Donuts the next day to practice. Ask about my grades with concern but not panic. Mention you work 2 jobs so you can't help with homework much. I nodded. Taking notes like this was a corporate presentation. "The conference is Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Bring tissues in case they mention my absences." He slid me his class schedule and disappeared. Thursday came fast. Mikey's teacher, Mrs. Yit, greeted me warmly. "So wonderful to finally meet you, Mrs. Tyrrell. Mikey talks about you constantly." I forced a smile, pulling out the tissues as instructed. "I worry about him. The divorce has been hard and I work so much." She squeezed my hand. "He's doing beautifully academically, but I do worry about his attendance." I dabbed my eyes perfectly. "His father isn't reliable with pickups. I'm trying my best." The meeting lasted 12 minutes. Mikey waited by the exit, handed me Merrick's algebra test with an A- circled in red, and we went our separate ways. I started leaving protein bars in random places I knew he'd find them. He started adding small notes to Merrick's tests. "Tell him the Lakers game was sick," or "he should try this equation method." By month 3, I knew his coffee order, and he knew I parked in the back lot to avoid my ex. When teachers praised my son, I felt oddly proud. When he won the science fair, I clapped louder than necessary. Still, we kept our distance. Then came the call that shattered everything. "Mrs. Tyrrell, this is St. Mary's Hospital. Your son's been admitted. Please come immediately." I don't remember driving there. Just remember bursting through ER doors, still in my Walmart vest, screaming, "Where is Mikey Tyrrell?" The nurse pointed to Trauma Bay. I shoved past security, saw him unconscious, face swollen beyond recognition, machines beeping everywhere. "Some kids jumped him for his shoes," a cop explained. "Stabbed him twice. Lost a lot of blood." Why wasn't anyone watching? Where was security? I screamed at them, not caring who heard me. I planted myself in that chair and didn't move for 72 hours. Even called in sick, then stopped answering when work called at all. When nurses tried to make me leave, I threatened lawsuits. That's my son. I'm not going anywhere. Mikey finally woke up on day 3, confused. "Why are you here?" "You don't have to." "Shut up. When's the last time you ate something real? What's your blood type?" I was already making lists, calling his teachers, arranging makeup work. His sister Ruth showed up after school, climbing right into his bed like she'd done this before. I found myself braiding her hair, humming some forgotten lullaby. "Are you our mom now?" she whispered. I couldn't answer. On day 5, his bio mom finally showed up for the first time ever. She was drunk, screaming about insurance fraud. Security dragged her out while Mikey shook. I held him while he sobbed. This kid who'd been carrying everything alone. "It's okay, baby. I got you. I got you both." When they discharged him, I drove them to their apartment. It was the first time I'd seen it and I almost broke down. 1 bedroom, mold on every ceiling, fridge containing only ketchup and expired milk. I came back with groceries and cleaned while he slept, then set up a schedule for Ruth's pickups. We tried returning to normal. But then the next conference happened. 2 days before, Mikey texted me the usual logistics. I had no plans to miss it, until Merrick, who I hadn't seen in months, shot me a text. "Mom, can we talk? I miss you." He told me his only available day, the same day as Mikey's conference. Mikey and I exchanged texts that night. "If you can't make it, I understand. I'll figure something out," he said. But I knew he was just saying that. 2 days later, I sat in my car, engine running, halfway between the school and the restaurant where Merrick's waited. 2 sons. My phone buzzed. Mikey again. "Mom?" I stared at the text for 3 seconds before typing back that I'd be there in 5 minutes. My fingers moved to Merrick's number and I typed asking if we could push our meeting back 30 minutes. The typing dots appeared and disappeared 4 times before his message came through. Just 2 words that felt like ice. I sent Mikey a quick text about traffic making me late and got back a heart emoji that somehow made everything worse. The school parking lot was packed and I had to circle 3 times before finding a spot way in the back. Mrs. Yit was already waiting outside her classroom when I jogged up 10 minutes late. She opened the door and motioned me into the small chairs meant for kids while pulling out a folder thick with papers. Her voice stayed professional, but I caught the concern in her eyes as she went through Mikey's grades, all A's and B's, before flipping to the attendance page covered in red marks. She mentioned something about state requirements and mandatory reporting if he missed 3 more days this month. I nodded and made the right concerned parent sounds, while my phone kept buzzing with messages I couldn't check. The meeting dragged on for 20 minutes with her suggesting counseling resources and asking about our home situation. I finally escaped and ran to my car, already 45 minutes late for Merrick. The restaurant was only 10 minutes away, but every red light felt like forever. I spotted him through the window before I even parked, sitting alone at a corner booth with an empty plate pushed aside. His head snapped up when the door chimed, and the look on his face made my stomach drop. I slid into the booth across from him and started to apologize, but he cut me off with a question about the other kid. His voice cracked on the word kid, and I could see him fighting not to cry. He knew about the hospital stay, and the nights I'd spent there instead of answering his calls. I tried to explain about Mikey needing help and Ruth being so young, but every word sounded hollow. Merrick pushed back from the table and stood up, his chair scraping loud against the floor. He said his dad had been right about me choosing strangers over family, and those words hit harder than any slap. I reached for his arm, but he pulled away and walked out without looking back. The waitress came over asking if I wanted anything, and I just shook my head and left cash for his meal. I drove home on autopilot and sat in my driveway for an hour before going inside. The apartment felt too quiet, and I couldn't eat or focus on anything. I kept checking my phone, but neither boy had texted, and I didn't know what to say anyway. Sleep wouldn't come, so I just laid there staring at the ceiling and going over every choice since that day at Walmart. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up and made coffee, then sat at the kitchen table with both boys' numbers pulled up on my phone. The sun was barely up when an unknown number called, and a woman identified herself as a social worker from the hospital. She had a soft voice, but her words made my blood run cold as she explained about follow-up protocols and coordinating with various agencies. She mentioned Mikey's injuries required ongoing documentation, and that Child Protective Services had been notified as standard procedure. I asked what that meant, and she paused before saying a caseworker would be calling me soon to discuss the family situation. She gave me a case number and hung up while I was still trying to process what she'd said. Not even an hour later, another call came through from someone named Celia Harper with CPS. Her tone was kind but firm as she explained they'd opened an investigation into the Tyrell family situation. She said the hospital report combined with the school's attendance concerns had triggered mandatory involvement. My hands shook as I wrote down everything she said about home visits and safety assessments and possible outcomes. She mentioned that keeping siblings together was always their goal, but they had to ensure a safe environment first. The word separation hung in the air even though she didn't say it directly. I thought about Ruth's small face when she'd asked if I was their mom now and felt sick. Celia said she'd be in touch within the week to schedule a home visit, and gave me another case number to add to my growing collection. After she hung up, I sat there holding my phone and realized I was in way over my head. These weren't just kids who needed help anymore, but an entire system of lawyers and social workers and judges who would decide their fate. I thought about calling someone for advice but couldn't think of anyone who'd understand this mess I'd created. My phone buzzed with a text from work asking why I'd missed my morning shift, and I realized I'd completely forgotten about my job. Everything was falling apart, and I had no idea how to fix any of it. 3 hours of sleep wasn't enough, but I dragged myself to the shower anyway, and threw on my Walmart vest while my coffee was still brewing. The clock showed 7:47 and my shift started at 7:30, but I grabbed my keys and drove anyway, knowing I was already screwed. I parked crooked in the employee lot and rushed through the back entrance hoping nobody would notice, but my manager was standing right there by the time clock. She pulled me into her office without saying anything, and I could see the write-up form already printed on her desk. "This is your final warning about attendance," she said, sliding the paper toward me. "1 more absence or late arrival and you're terminated. No exceptions." I signed it with shaking hands because we both knew I needed this job to pay rent and buy food. She told me to get to my register and I nodded, walking out with my head down and the weight of everything crushing my chest. That night, after picking up Ruth from her after-school program and making sure she ate the leftover spaghetti I'd made, my phone buzzed with a text from Mikey. "Mrs. Yit noticed my test scores don't match my homework," it said, and I could feel panic in every word. "She's asking questions and I can't risk getting caught because they'll take Ruth away." Another text came through immediately saying he wanted to stop the whole arrangement before someone figured it out. I texted back right away that we should stop, that I'd help both boys study for real even if it meant Merrick would fail his classes and lose his spot on the team. Mikey sent a thumbs up emoji, but I knew he was worried about Merrick's future too. This kid who cared about everyone except himself. The next morning, while I was stocking shelves in the pet food aisle, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Tyrrell? This is Jordan Beck from the counseling office at Mikey's school." My voice caught when I said yes because I was still lying about being his mother. Jordan explained they needed to discuss Mikey's attendance improvement plan and asked if I could come in for a meeting that week. I agreed to Thursday at 2 p.m., writing it on my hand since I didn't have my calendar with me. Thursday came fast, and I sat across from Jordan in his small office that smelled like coffee and old books. He pulled out a folder with Mikey's name on it and started explaining all these resources they had available. "We have transportation assistance for families without reliable vehicles," he said, showing me a brochure. And there's a breakfast program that starts at 7 a.m. so kids can eat before class. The guilt washed over me as he treated me like Mikey's real mother, being so kind and helpful about everything. He showed me forms for free lunch applications and after-school tutoring programs, explaining each one carefully like I might not understand. I nodded and took notes, feeling worse with every resource he offered because none of this was really mine to accept. When he paused to get more forms from his filing cabinet, I cleared my throat and said quietly that I was more of a family friend helping out during a tough time. Jordan stopped shuffling papers and looked at me with understanding in his eyes. "That's very generous of you to step up," he said, sitting back down. Getting another stable adult officially involved might actually help with the CPS situation. He explained about kinship care and family friend placements, how the system preferred keeping kids with people they knew instead of strangers. I left his office with a stack of papers and my head spinning from all the information. 2 days later, Celia called while I was on my lunch break, sitting in my car eating a granola bar. "I need to schedule a home visit at the Tyrell residence," she said in that professional but kind voice I remembered. "This week, if possible, to assess the living situation." She emphasized that the goal was keeping the family together, not separating them, but they needed to document everything for the case file. We scheduled it for Tuesday at 4 p.m., and I spent the whole weekend before that trying to clean Mikey's apartment. The mold on the ceiling wouldn't come off no matter how much I scrubbed, and I couldn't fix the broken cabinet doors or the window that wouldn't close all the way. Tuesday arrived, and Celia showed up right on time with a clipboard and a camera. She walked through each room slowly, taking pictures of the mold spreading across the bathroom ceiling and the bedroom ceiling too. She opened the fridge and documented that it only had a jar of peanut butter, some bread and milk I'd bought yesterday. She took photos of the mattress on the floor where Ruth slept, and asked about sleeping arrangements for both kids. I explained that Mikey slept on the couch and Ruth got the bedroom, which made Celia write something long on her form. She discussed different safety plan options, including temporary placement, while Biomom got treatment for her drinking problem. We were going over paperwork at the kitchen table when the front door slammed open and Biomom stumbled in, clearly drunk even though it was only 4:30 in the afternoon. "What the hell is this?" she slurred, pointing at Celia. "You can't just come in my house without permission." Celia stayed completely calm, explaining she was there for a scheduled visit about the children's welfare. Biomom started yelling about her rights as a parent and how nobody could take her kids away. Celia kept her voice steady, explaining the requirements for keeping custody, including maintaining a safe environment and addressing substance abuse issues. Biomom knocked over a lamp on purpose and screamed that everyone was against her before storming out and slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. Celia just made more notes and said she'd be in touch about next steps. The following week, I was running the self-checkout stations when my phone rang showing the elementary school's number. "Is this Mrs. Tyrrell?" the school nurse asked. "Ruth is in my office with a fever of 102 and she's asking for you." I looked at my manager across the store, knowing what would happen if I left, but told the nurse I'd be there in 15 minutes. I clocked out without asking permission, and drove to Ruth's school where I found her curled up on the nurse's cot looking so small and sick. She reached for me when I walked in, and I picked her up even though she was getting too big for that. The nurse gave me discharge papers and told me to watch for worsening symptoms, and I carried Ruth to my car knowing my job was probably gone, but not caring because she needed someone and that someone had become me. Ruth slept in my backseat all the way home while I kept checking the mirror to make sure she was still breathing. My phone had 17 missed calls from work by the time I carried her inside and tucked her into my bed with a cool washcloth on her forehead. I knew I had to find a better solution for these kids before I lost everything trying to help them. My fingers shook as I scrolled to my ex-husband's number, the one I hadn't called in over a year except about Merrick's school stuff. He picked up on the third ring, and I could hear his new wife laughing in the background about something. I explained about Mikey and Ruth needing a safe place temporarily while their mom got help, trying to keep my voice steady and reasonable. "Absolutely not," he said before I even finished. "I'm not bringing that chaos into my home." I stared at the wall while he listed all the reasons it was a terrible idea, including how it would confuse Merrick and disrupt their stable household. I thanked him for listening and hung up without arguing because what was the point? Ruth's fever broke around midnight and she ate some soup while watching cartoons on my phone. The next morning, I dropped her at the school and drove straight to Walmart where my manager was waiting by the time clock with that look that meant bad news. She pulled me into the office and slid a paper across the desk showing my new schedule, 20 hours a week instead of 40. "This is the best I can do," she said. "Corporate wanted you gone completely, but I fought for part-time." I signed the paper knowing 20 hours meant $800 a month if I was lucky. Gas alone cost $200, groceries for 4 people ran $300 minimum, and that was before rent or utilities or anything else. I picked up extra shifts at the gas station down the street, but they only paid minimum wage and wanted me available whenever they called. Some weeks I had $30 after gas and had to choose between milk and bread, between laundry detergent and toilet paper. I stopped eating lunch to save money and started watering down the orange juice to make it last longer. Sleep became something that happened in 2-hour chunks between worrying about money and checking on the kids. 3 weeks into the new schedule, my phone buzzed with a text from Merrick's basketball coach saying he was benching Merrick for the next 3 games due to failing grades. I called Merrick immediately, but he didn't answer. Then again. Then 5 more times throughout the day. Finally, around 10 that night, he texted back a paragraph about how I obviously didn't care about him anymore since I had my new fake family. So why should he care about school or basketball or anything? His words sat heavy in my chest all night while I stared at the ceiling trying to figure out how to fix this. The next afternoon, I drove to his school and parked where I could see the gym doors, waiting for practice to end. Players started coming out in groups, but Merrick was one of the last ones, walking alone with his bag dragging on the ground. I got out and called his name, and he stopped but didn't turn around. "Give me one chance," I said. "One chance to tutor you properly. No tricks or schemes or anyone else involved." He turned around slowly, and I could see his eyes were red like maybe he'd been crying. "Just you and me working on your grades, honestly," I continued. "If I'm late or cancel or bring those other kids, you can be done with me forever." He stared at me for a long time before nodding once. "Tuesday at 4, he said. "Library study room 3, and if you're even 5 minutes late, I'm leaving." I agreed to his terms immediately, grateful he was giving me any chance at all. Tuesday came and I got to the library 30 minutes early, spreading out algebra books and practice problems on the table. Merrick showed up exactly at 4, dropped his backpack hard on the table and sat down without looking at me. I pushed a worksheet toward him and pointed to the first problem without saying anything. He picked up his pencil and started working while I watched, only speaking to correct a small error in his formula. We made it through 12 problems in complete silence except for the scratch of his pencil and the hum of the air conditioning. After exactly 1 hour, he packed up his stuff and left without saying goodbye, but he'd completed every problem and gotten 8 of them right. I sat there for another 20 minutes feeling like maybe we'd turned a tiny corner. That small hope lasted exactly 2 days before Jordan Beck's email showed up with the subject line, "Urgent, academic integrity concern." My hands went numb as I read about irregularities between Merrick's test scores and his homework grades over the past several months. He needed to meet with me as Merrick's mother within 48 hours to discuss potential violations of the academic honesty policy. I spent that entire night at my kitchen table with a legal pad, writing out different versions of what to say. Tell the whole truth and destroy both boys' futures. Lie completely and risk getting caught, or find something in between that might protect them. By sunrise, I knew I had to tell at least part of the truth because the evidence was too obvious, and lying would only make things worse for everyone. I put on my only nice blouse and drove to the school with my stomach in knots. Jordan's office felt smaller than I remembered as I sat across from his desk watching him pull out a folder with Merrick's name on it. "We've identified concerning patterns in Merrick's testing," he said, showing me a graph with huge spikes in certain test scores. I took a deep breath and told him another student had taken some of Merrick's tests, but I wouldn't say who. "It was my fault entirely," I said. "I arranged it because I was desperate to keep him on the team." Jordan wrote notes while I talked, his face getting more serious with every word. He explained the school's policies and the minimum consequences they'd have to enforce. They would invalidate all the suspicious tests going back 3 months, and Marek would have to retake them with mandatory proctoring. The basketball suspension would extend from 3 games to 6, and he'd be on academic probation for the rest of the year. I accepted every consequence without argument, knowing it could have been so much worse if they knew everything. Marek had to report to the testing center the next Monday for his first retake, and I drove him there in complete silence. 3 days after the retake, Marek called me while I was stocking shelves at work, and his voice sounded different, harder somehow. He told me he'd talked to his dad about moving in with him full-time since I'd basically destroyed his life with this whole mess. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my voice steady and told him I understood if that's what he needed to do. He hung up without saying goodbye, and I stood there holding my phone until my manager yelled at me to get back to work. That night, I drove to his dad's house and found Marek shooting baskets in the driveway, refusing to look at me when I got out of the car. I sat on the porch steps and waited until he finally came over, sweaty and angry. I apologized for everything, for the lies and the cheating and for choosing other kids over him. Then I pulled out my phone and showed him my calendar with his tutoring sessions marked in green and Mikey's stuff in blue, proving he mattered just as much. He stared at the screen for a long time before nodding once and going back inside without a word. The next morning, Celia called while I was making coffee and told me about something called temporary emergency placement that I could apply for if I passed a home study. The idea of officially taking Mikey and Ruth scared me, but also made something warm spread through my chest. She emailed me the paperwork, and I printed it at the library, filling out page after page of questions about my income and living situation and criminal history. The background check cost $75 I didn't have, but I paid it anyway, knowing rent would be short this month. I spent the whole weekend cleaning my apartment and buying safety locks for the cabinets with my last $40. Every receipt I saved meant choosing between gas and groceries, but having a safe place for those kids mattered more than eating regular meals. Monday morning, my manager cornered me in the break room and laid it out plain and simple. Either I committed to a fixed schedule with no more sudden absences, or I needed to find another job. She'd already written up the paperwork for both options and pushed them across the table toward me. I stared at the forms knowing that fixed hours meant missing school pickups and emergency calls, but no job meant no apartment at all. My hands shook as I asked for 24 hours to decide, and she agreed, but her face said she already knew my answer. That afternoon, Monica Washington from Social Services called, and I almost cried when she said she'd gotten me approved for food assistance and a $300 emergency grant. She walked me through the application process over the phone while I scribbled notes on the back of an envelope. The money would take 2 weeks to arrive, but just knowing it was coming made me feel like I could breathe again for the first time in days. 3 nights later, Ruth showed up at my door at 11 p.m. in her pajamas and bare feet because her mom hadn't come home again. She climbed into my bed without asking and woke up screaming about people taking her away at 2 in the morning. I held her while she shook and hummed the same song my mom used to sing when I had bad dreams as a kid. She finally fell back asleep with her head on my shoulder and her small hand gripping my shirt like she was afraid I'd disappear too. The next day, Mikey found out about the cheating scandal when Jordan called him to the office to discuss Merrick's retakes. He texted me right after, saying he felt terrible about hurting my real son and wanted to make things right somehow. He offered to tutor Merrick for real. No tricks or schemes, just honest help with his schoolwork as an apology for the mess we'd created. I was skeptical but desperate enough to try anything that might help both boys, so we worked out a deal. Mikey would tutor Merrick twice a week at the library in exchange for rides home and dinner afterward. Both boys agreed to try, though I could tell neither one really wanted to spend time together. They were doing it for me, and that made my chest tight with something between guilt and gratitude. The first session was a disaster from the start, with both of them sitting as far apart as the table would allow. Mikey tried explaining a math problem, but Merrick kept insisting he already knew how to do it, even though his answers were wrong. Their voices got louder and louder until Mikey slammed his pencil down, and Merrick stood up so fast his chair fell over. Other people in the library started staring, and the librarian headed our way with a stern look on her face. I grabbed both boys by the arm and marched them outside to the parking lot where they could yell without getting us banned. Merrick accused Mikey of trying to replace him, and Mikey shot back that at least he didn't need someone else to take his tests for him. They were inches apart with their fists clenched when I stepped between them and made them both sit on opposite ends of a bench to cool down. We sat there in silence for 15 minutes while cars drove past and the sun started setting behind the buildings. Mikey broke the silence by pulling out his math notebook and showing Marek a different way to solve the problem they'd been fighting about. Merrick watched without saying anything, but I could see him following along as Mikey worked through each step slowly. After 10 minutes, Merrick picked up his pencil and tried the method himself, getting it right on the first try. They worked through 3 more problems in the parking lot while I sat between them, making sure things stayed calm. When we got home that night, I found Ruth already asleep on my couch because Bio Mom hadn't picked her up from the neighbor who watched her after school. I covered her with a blanket and started making dinner while the boys sat at my kitchen table doing homework in awkward silence. Around midnight, I woke to pounding on my door so loud it shook the walls and Bio Mom's voice screaming she wanted her kids back right now. Ruth started crying in the living room and Mikey ran out of the bedroom looking scared while Bio Mom kept hammering on the door, threatening to break it down. I told the kids to stay back and yelled through the door that I was calling 911 if she didn't leave immediately. She screamed more threats about how I was stealing her babies and she'd make me pay, but when I actually dialed the police, she stumbled away cursing. The next morning, Celia called saying we needed an emergency meeting about what happened because the neighbors had already reported the incident. She came to my apartment that afternoon and saw Ruth's clothes in a corner and Mikey's backpack by the door. She said Bio Mom's behavior was escalating dangerously and the kids might need immediate removal from her custody for their safety. We spent 2 hours going through emergency placement options while the kids sat in the bedroom pretending to do homework, but really just listening to every word. Celia said she could approve a temporary safety plan where Ruth stayed with me on the school nights and Mikey alternated between my place and checking on their apartment. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep them away from Bio Mom while she was required to enter a treatment program or lose custody completely. The judge signed the order that same week, and suddenly I had Ruth's pink backpack permanently in my hallway and a schedule taped to my fridge showing which nights Mikey would sleep over. The new routine hit hard immediately when I got so focused on getting Ruth ready for school that I completely forgot about Merrick's practice. He waited 2 hours at the field before finally calling his dad to pick him up, and I didn't even know I'd messed up until he texted me that night. His message was short, but I could feel the hurt in every word about how I'd promised things would be different. But here I was, forgetting him again. I drove to his dad's house the next morning and stood on the porch apologizing while Merrick wouldn't even look at me. I told him I'd already called Jordan at the school to set up a backup transportation system, so if I ever couldn't make it, someone would definitely be there. Merrick said that just proved I knew I'd fail him again, but at least I was planning for it this time, which was something. That afternoon, I sat in my manager's office at Walmart, asking to switch to morning shifts only, even though it meant losing hours and money. She wasn't happy about losing flexibility with my schedule, but agreed to try it for 1 month to see if I could make it work. The new schedule meant I'd make about $200 less each month, but I'd be free every afternoon for pickups and emergencies. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived from the hospital with bills from Mikey's stabbing that made my hands shake. The total was more than I made in 2 years, and I just stared at the numbers knowing I'd never be able to pay it. Monica called that afternoon like she somehow knew, and walked me through applications for charity care and payment plans over the phone. She helped me fill out form after form, proving I couldn't afford the bills and explaining our whole situation to get the amount reduced. A week later, the principal called saying the school was opening a formal investigation into the test cheating after a teacher noticed patterns in the grades. He said they needed to meet with me immediately to discuss the situation, and I knew lying now could mean actual criminal charges for fraud. I sat in that office the next day with Jordan and the principal staring at me while I told them everything about the arrangement. I explained how Mikey was desperate to keep his family together, and I was desperate to help my son pass his classes. I took full responsibility as the adult who should have known better, and said I'd accept whatever consequences they decided. The principal said they'd have to invalidate all the tests Mikey took and put Merrick on academic probation, with required tutoring 3 times a week. Mikey would have to do 50 hours of community service at the school and write a formal apology letter to the administration. They decided not to press criminal charges since nobody had actually gained financially from the cheating, and both boys were clearly struggling with difficult family situations. We all walked out of that meeting breathing sighs of relief that it wasn't worse, even though both boys now had permanent marks on their school records. That night, Marek showed up at my door holding his backpack and looking at his shoes, while he talked about feeling like I'd picked some random kid over him. He said he got why I was helping Mikey and Ruth now, but it still hurt watching me care about them when I'd been missing his games for months. He agreed to keep working with Mikey on tutoring since the kid actually knew his stuff and could explain algebra better than most teachers. The next morning, Celia called saying she needed to do the full home study that week if I wanted the emergency placement approved. She came by Tuesday afternoon with a clipboard and started checking everything from smoke detectors to whether I had locks on the cabinets under the sink. She wrote down that I needed carbon monoxide detectors in every bedroom and safety latches on all the windows above the first floor. I spent the entire weekend at Home Depot buying everything on her list and installing it myself while watching YouTube videos on my phone. The smoke detectors alone cost me $40, but I screwed them into every ceiling and tested each one 3 times. Monday morning, Celia came back for the follow-up inspection and checked off every item on her list, while Ruth followed us around asking if this meant she could stay forever. 2 weeks later, the paperwork came through approving the emergency placement for 3 months while their mom went through outpatient treatment. The judge ordered supervised visits every Saturday at the community center, where a social worker would watch their mom interact with the kids for 2 hours. My new morning schedule at work started that same week, and my first paycheck was almost $300 less than before. I sat in my car staring at the numbers and telling myself that having predictable hours mattered more than the money, even though rent was due in 5 days. Jordan called that afternoon saying he'd found a community tutoring center that offered free help twice a week for kids on academic probation. He'd already signed Merrick up for Tuesday and Thursday sessions, which meant Mikey could focus on his own homework instead of teaching algebra every night. The first session went better than expected, and Merrick came out saying the tutor actually made sense and didn't make him feel stupid for not getting it right away. 3 weeks later, Merrick took his algebra retake with a proctor watching his every move and managed to pull off a C-. His coach let him back on the team after missing just 1 game and said he could see real improvement in how Merrick was handling the pressure. Mikey's attendance record slowly climbed back up to acceptable levels once I started driving him every morning and making sure he actually walked through the school doors. Ruth started sleeping through the whole night without waking up screaming about someone taking her away. Their mom hit her 30-day mark at the treatment center, and the counselor said she seemed committed to staying clean this time. I bought a wall calendar and color-coded everyone's schedules with green for Merrick's stuff and blue for Mikey and Ruth's appointments. Looking at all those colored squares covering every single day made me tired just thinking about it. But we were making it work somehow. Well, that's gonna do it for today. Thanks for letting me wander through all these curious details with you. It's been really fun sharing this time together. Take care, and like the video, it helps more than you think.